On August 14, 2024, a technical dive team conducting a deep water survey of the Blue Hole's northern arch lowered a remote-operated vehicle into the silt. The water at 300 feet is a bruised purple, a transition zone where the sun loses its authority and the pressure begins to compress the human psyche as much as the lungs. The ROV's headlights swept over a limestone shelf, illuminating a shape that did not belong to the geology of the abyss. It was a ruggedized camera housing, partially buried in fine white sediment, its tether long since rotted away. This was not a modern piece of equipment. It was a relic. When the casing was brought to the surface and the internal memory card was painstakingly recovered in a cleanroom environment, the first image that flickered onto the monitor was a date stamp, October 12, 2014. It was the day Marcus Thorne disappeared. Marcus was not an amateur. He was the expert victim. He was a master-rated technical diver with over 2,000 logged hours, a man who viewed the ocean not as a playground but as a series of mathematical equations to be solved. He carried redundant gas supplies, 3 independent depth gauges, and a precision-engineered dive computer. He was prepared for every failure except the one he couldn't see. The mountains of the deep do not care for preparation. They do not acknowledge expertise. They simply wait. At 9:15 a.m. on that October morning, Marcus entered the water with a single goal: to document the cavern system at 600 feet. This is the twilight zone of diving, a place where the nitrogen in your blood becomes a narcotic and every breath is a calculated risk. His last radio check was routine. It was mundane. It was the final anchor to a world he would never see again. "Descending now," he had said. "Visibility is optimal." Then the void. No distress signal, no surface bubbles, no debris. For 10 years, his disappearance was a statistical anomaly, a ghost story for the diving community. His family lived in the wreckage of the unknown, haunted by the open loop of a life left mid-sentence. They became the grieving investigators, poring over tide charts and current patterns, looking for a logic that wasn't there. Imagine you are standing on that dive boat in 2014. The sun is warm on your skin. You watch the bubbles disappear. You wait for the scheduled return at 11:30 a.m. The time passes, 11:45, 12 o'clock. The silence of the ocean is different than the silence of the land. It is heavy. It is absolute. The recovery of the camera changed everything. It transformed a mystery into a forensic record. The metadata on the files provides a time-stamped descent into the impossible. At 9:42 a.m., Marcus reached the 300-foot mark. The photos show his gauges. They were perfect. At 9:58 a.m., he passed 500 feet. The light here is non-existent, captured only by the artificial glare of his strobe. The walls of the cavern are slick with ancient bacteria. There is a photo of his compass. It shows a steady heading. He was in total control. He was the embodiment of human competence facing the indifferent gravity of the sea, but the ocean keeps its secrets until it is finished with them. The camera shows Marcus reaching the 600-foot floor. It shows him setting up a tripod. Why would he stop there? Why would a man of his experience ignore the narrowing of the passage? The irony of his skill was that it gave him the confidence to enter a space that no amount of air could help him escape. The mountain beneath the waves does not explain why it takes what it takes. It only provides the evidence of the taking. The logs found later in his hotel room showed a man obsessed with this specific coordinate. He had circled it in red. He had written the word anomaly 3 times. In the world of technical diving, an anomaly is a death sentence, yet he walked toward it with the precision of a surgeon. At 10:12 a.m., the camera captures a shadow. It is not a biological shadow. It is a shift in the silt, a movement of the earth itself. Marcus turns the camera. The frame is blurred. This is the moment the narrative shifts from the disappearance to the discovery. The evidence log of his equipment recovery years later would include a torn buoyancy compensator and a fin with a jagged snap. These are not marks of a predator. These are marks of a struggle against the environment. The pressure at 600 feet is nearly 300 pounds per square inch. It is a weight that crushes the soul before it crushes the ribs. We look at the photos and we ask the same question the investigators asked a decade ago. Why did he stay? What did he see in that silt that was worth the price of the surface? The reconstruction of the truth begins with the final 3 minutes of the footage. At 10:15 a.m., Marcus is no longer filming the cave. He is filming his hands. They are steady. He is checking his gas levels. He has 40 minutes of oxygen left. Plenty of time to ascend, plenty of time to live. But he doesn't move. He stares into the darkness beyond the strobe light. The mountains don't explain why, and Marcus Thorne can no longer speak for himself. He is a frozen moment in forensic history. The camera housing, scratched and pitted by a decade of salt, is the only witness. It tells us that at 10:18 a.m., something happened that defied his training. It was not a mechanical failure. It was not a lack of air. It was a choice, or perhaps a realization. In the deep, the line between the two vanishes. You are there with him, feeling the cold seep through the neoprene, hearing the rhythmic metallic rasp of the regulator. It is the sound of a clock ticking underwater. Every breath is a withdrawal from a bank account that is almost empty. The ocean is a silent chronicler. It recorded his presence and then it recorded his absence. The footage ends with a static-filled frame. It is a shot of the cave ceiling tilted at an impossible angle. No signal, no trace, just silence. The secondary recovery effort, launched in the autumn of 2024, moved with a funereal precision. The team did not expect to find Marcus Thorne. They expected to find the architecture of a crisis. At 11:04 a.m. on September 3rd, the ROV's mechanical arm retracted a secondary object from the shelf where the camera had been found. It was a primary dive reel. The high-tensile nylon line was not snapped. It had been cut. The forensic analysis of the cordage revealed a clean, pressurized shear, suggesting it was severed with a titanium dive knife, Marcus's own knife. This is the first fracture in the image of the expert victim. A diver of Thorne's caliber knows that the guideline is the only umbilical cord to the surface. To cut it is to voluntarily enter the labyrinth. Why would he do this? The grieving investigator, staring at the macro shots of the frayed nylon, sees not a mistake, but an intentional act of isolation. At 3:15 p.m. that same day, a more harrowing piece of the evidence log was recovered. The left-hand glove of a dry suit. It was caught in a jagged limestone fissure 40 feet deeper than the camera. Inside the glove, there was no biological trace, only fine gray silt. The mountains of the deep do not just take a life, they erase the evidence of it. The glove was turned inside out, a physical manifestation of a desperate struggle against a vacuum. Imagine you are in that suit. The pressure at 640 feet is an atmospheric hammer. Your mind is clouded by nitrogen narcosis, the rapture of the deep, where the world feels distant, euphoric, and deceptively safe. You feel the urge to breathe deeper, but the air is thick, like inhaling mercury. You reach for your line, but the line is gone. You are the one who cut it. The forensic reconstruction suggests that at 10:22 a.m. on the day of the disappearance, Marcus Thorne experienced a profound psychological break, or perhaps a terrifyingly logical response to an unseen threat. The camera footage from the previous batch showed a shadow. The physical evidence shows the reaction. He was stripping away his equipment. Forensic images of his buoyancy compensator found 3 days later showed the straps were unbuckled, not torn. He wasn't being pulled out of his gear. He was taking it off. This is the rule of irony in its most cruel form. The very gear designed to keep him alive in the most hostile environment on Earth had become a cage he felt the need to escape. The ocean is not a room you can simply leave. At 10:28 a.m., the timestamp of the last active ping from his dive computer, recovered nearby, indicates a rapid descent. He wasn't swimming up. He was falling. The computer's log shows a depth of 712 feet before the sensors failed under the weight of the water. He was far beyond the structural limits of his equipment. He was in a realm where physics replaces biology. The grieving investigator looks at the GPS drift data from that morning and sees a pattern of erratic movement. It wasn't a current, it was a pursuit or a flight. The mountains don't explain why, but the silt provides a hint. Thermal imaging of the cave floor conducted during the 2024 survey revealed a geothermal vent, a black smoker, located directly beneath the shelf where Marcus's gear was scattered. These vents release superheated, mineral-rich water that can distort light and create shimmering, predatory shadows. To a man suffering from narcosis, a thermal vent is not a geological feature. It is a doorway or a mouth. At 10:31 a.m., the silence was final. No signal, no trace, just the cold weight of the Atlantic. The discovery of his watch, a heavy-duty chronograph, provided the final timestamp of the physical struggle. The sapphire crystal was cracked from the inside out. This occurs when the internal pressure of the watch, sealed at the surface, becomes greater than the external pressure of a rapidly receding environment, a phenomenon seen only in catastrophic depth changes. It stopped at 10:34. The ocean had claimed the man and broke the machine. The journals of Marcus Thorne were recovered from a humidity-controlled safe in his home office 3 weeks after the initial disappearance, but their contents were suppressed by the primary investigators for a decade. Now, in the light of the 2024 discovery, they serve as the metadata of a haunting. The entries do not describe a man in decline, they describe a man in a state of hyper-lucid obsession. He was a forensic chronicler of his own descent. On September 12, 2014, 1 month before the void took him, he wrote, "The acoustics at 500 feet are shifting. It is not the sound of the regulator. It is a frequency that resonates in the bone marrow. The sonar is picking up geometries that the charts say don't exist. There is a structure in the silt. It is not coral. It is not stone." This is the voice of the expert victim, a man whose technical proficiency allowed him to notice the minute deviations in reality that a lesser diver would have ignored. He was documenting an impossibility. The grieving investigator, reading these lines 10 years later, recognizes the trap. Marcus wasn't losing his mind. He was finding something that wasn't meant to be found. At 8:14 p.m. on the night before his final dive, the log entry is a single chilling sentence. The mountains don't explain why, but they invite you to see for yourself. Imagine the quiet of that room, the ticking of a clock, the smell of neoprene and silicone. Marcus was checking his seals, calibrating his computers, and preparing for a journey he knew might be one way. He wasn't a victim of a mistake. He was a participant in an event. The reconstruction of the narrative truth must account for the anomaly mentioned in these pages. Forensic imaging of his personal laptop revealed a series of encrypted files titled The Arch. When decrypted using a key found on a slip of paper in his wallet, recovered with the camera, the files showed a series of grainy, low-light photographs taken during a reconnaissance dive in August 2014. They show a symmetry that nature rarely produces, a series of pillars perfectly aligned, disappearing into the white fog of the deep silt. There is no biological explanation for these shapes. There is only the silence of the abyss. The irony of Marcus's preparation is that it allowed him to go exactly where the danger was greatest. His skill was the vehicle for his destruction. At 9:18 a.m. on the day of the dive, his surface support recorded his final heart rate, a steady 62 beats per minute. He was calm. He was a man walking into a burning building because he wanted to study the chemistry of the flame. The evidence log of his digital life shows a man who had stopped looking at the surface world entirely. His search history was a litany of technical terms: deep water resonance, silt-induced hallucinations, atmospheric pressure on the pineal gland. He was researching the ways the ocean could break him, even as he invited it to do so. The mountains keep their secrets, but Marcus was trying to steal them. The 2024 recovery of his secondary dive computer provided a final piece of the digital puzzle. It contained a black box recording of the ambient sound during the final minutes. It is a recording of rhythmic, mechanical breathing, followed by a sudden, sharp intake of air. Then a voice. It is a whisper, barely audible over the hiss of the helium mix. It's not empty. Who was he talking to? The ocean or himself? The grieving investigator listens to this audio on a loop, searching for a signal in the static. There is no second voice. There is only the sound of the deep, a low-frequency hum that matches the description in his journal. At 10:24 a.m., the audio cuts out. No signal, no trace, just the cold, analytical reality of a recording that outlasted its maker. This is the forensic truth of the blue hole. It is a place where the mundane laws of the surface are suspended. We look at the photos of the pillars, the metadata of the heart rate, and the severed nylon line, and we try to build a bridge of logic across a chasm of the unknown. But the bridge doesn't hold. The mountains don't explain why. They only provide the evidence of our own insignificance. On September 14, 2024, at 12:02 p.m., the ROV's primary camera focused on a yellow whistle, a beacon of failed utility resting in the absolute dark. Beside it lay the final fragments of the Marcus Thorne narrative, a titanium dive knife and a lead weight belt, abandoned with the same deliberate intent as the dive reel. This is the reconstruction of the narrative truth. The physical evidence points to a phenomenon known as terminal stripping, a behavior often seen in the final stages of hypothermia or extreme psychological duress where the victim sheds the very tools required for survival. But Marcus was not cold, he was under pressure. The grieving investigator, examining the macro shots of the weight belt, notes that the quick-release buckle was not fumbled, it was operated perfectly. Marcus had chosen to become buoyant, but he hadn't used that buoyancy to ascend. He had used it to drift into the ceiling of the cavern, pinning himself against the stone, becoming part of the geology. The mountains of the deep do not take us, they simply allow us to lose ourselves. At 1:15 p.m., the ROV pushed deeper into the side chamber, revealing a series of markings on the limestone wall. They were not natural erosions. They were scratches, deep and desperate, carved into the soft mineral surface by a human hand using a titanium blade. The forensic imaging team spent 48 hours enhancing the shadows in these grooves. The marks formed a series of tally lines followed by a single word: wait. This is the horror of the expert victim. He did not die in a moment of panic. He died in a state of prolonged analytical observation. He was waiting for the anomaly to reveal its final face. The rule of irony concludes here. The man who lived his life by the clock spent his final hours in a place where time has no meaning. Imagine you are there, pressed against the cold ceiling of a world that has never known light. You have no air, you have no line. You have only the silence and the thing you found in the silt. The metadata of the human soul is not recorded on memory cards, but it is etched into the stone. At 2:30 p.m., the 2024 recovery team officially ceased operations. The current at that depth had begun to shift, threatening to bury the site once again. They left the whistle. They left the knife. Some things are not meant to be brought back to the surface. The mountains keep their secrets, and Marcus Thorne is now one of them. The forensic essayist must conclude that the shocking truth promised by the discovery of the camera is not a monster or a mechanical failure. It is the terrifying capacity of the human mind to seek the void when it feels the void calling back. The anomaly was not a structure or a frequency. It was the realization that at 600 feet, the surface world, with its air, its light, and its logic, is the hallucination, and the deep is the only reality. The evidence log is closed. Marcus Thorne, master diver, expert victim, chronicler of the abyss. His equipment has been catalogued, his journals archived, and his final movements mapped with forensic precision. Yet the open loop remains. Why did he cut the line? The ocean provides the data, but it refuses the context. We are left with the image of a man who prepared for everything and found that everything was not enough. Imagine you are standing on the shore today, 10 years after the vanishment, looking out at the calm blue horizon. The water looks shallow, it looks safe. But you know what lies beneath the silt. You know about the pillars and the tally marks on the ceiling. The moral warning is etched into the salt of every wave. Do not mistake your knowledge for power. The sea does not bargain with experts. It only respects the pressure. At 3 p.m., the recovery ship turned back toward the coast, leaving the blue hole to its ancient, heavy silence. No signal, no trace, just the weight of the water. The mountains don't explain why, and perhaps for our own sanity we should stop asking. Justice through memory has been served, but the truth remains submerged, 600 feet below the reach of the sun. The story of Marcus Thorne is a timestamp in the long, dark history of the deep, a record of a man who went looking for the secret of the mountains and became the secret himself. No more words are needed. The water has the final say.